Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for spending time to attend this session. My name is Nitin Shanbhag. I head investment products for Motilal Oswal Wealth. While most of our webinars focus on investments and wealth creation oriented studies, today's session is very, very different because it focuses on geopolitics, also a very interesting topic, and I'm sure that is something that could appeal to a lot of you. And to talk more about today's session, which centers around India, China, and Afghanistan, we have with us Mr. Abhijit Iyer, Mitra. And let me give you a brief introduction to Abhijit before I hand it over to him. Abhijit is a senior fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. A defense economist, he is pursuing his PhD in war studies from the King's College in London. He has regular columns in The Print, Economic Times, Business Standard, Mint, and Money Control, as well as bylines in all major national dailies, as well as the New York Times. He also has co-authored 2 books, one on military reforms and another on Afghanistan. And he also has a 3rd book on the Hindu right in India. Additionally, he has several academic publications to his credit, dealing with defense and foreign policy. Prior to his current post, he coordinated the National Security Program at the Observer Research Foundation, ORF. At ORF, Abhijit was in the startup team curating Sci-Fi, one of the world's premier conferences on international cyber governance and laws. He also accumulated a considerable body of work on the subjects of privacy and cyber surveillance and the gaping holes in Indian jurisprudence that allowed severe abuse of nebulous laws. He also curated the Raisina Dialogue, which is India's window to the outside world, inaugurated by the Prime Minister and hosting several heads of state. Concurrently, he was visiting scholar at Sandia National Laboratories, Albuquerque, and at the Stimson Center, Washington, D.C. His hobbies include flying recreational aircraft and scuba diving, and he is a proud parent of 2 dogs. Warm welcome to you, Abhijit, and let me hand it over to you for the rest of the session, and I'll be very, very happy to moderate all the questions that our clients may have. Over to you.
Thank you, Nitin. It turns out I'm also the proud parent of 2 cats now, 2 little kittens. So if you see some kittens jumping about on my head or on my hoodie, I apologize for it. So, one of the things I did was, because for me, I trained as a defense economist. We try to correlate everything with the economy. And what I wanted to show you today was how there is a lot of social churn within China, which affects its foreign policy and then has a knockdown effect on places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Southeast Asia, and things like that. So the main thrust of this is I'm going to first examine China, because there seems to be such a hullabaloo about China, how it's going to be China's century and China is it's a Chinese century and all of that. I'm going to try to mute those expectations, or dampen at least those expectations for you, so that when you're dealing with things like wealth and things, you begin to see how these things sometimes go quite badly wrong in China. So when you're looking at China, I've kind of split this into 5 things that I'm going to go over slowly. The first of it is politics. Now, in politics, I think what you all know is how Xi Jinping has pretty much consolidated power. Till about 10 years back, when we used to talk China, we'd be talking about how they're all the Guanchis, the factions, the princelings, the Shanghai faction, and things like that within the governance structure, and how they were constantly at each other's throats, trying to trip up each other and gain more institutional power and things like that. They're boys in the top echelons. And the unknown commodity was always the military. Because what happened with the military was it had become such an independent power structure as part of Deng Xiaoping's reforms that you never really know what the military was going to do. If you remember during Jiang Zemin's, the end of President Jiang Zemin's time, transitioning into sort of Hu Jintao's period, you would occasionally hear rumors of, a possible coup or unrest within the military and things like that. And there was a very specific reason for it. Mao Zedong, his position was never completely consolidated. If you remember, he was, he wasn't sent into exile. He kind of took sannyas or exile or something like that and went into sort of political hibernation for a while. And then he would come back with a bang, which shows you how much power his opponents could accumulate every now and then, that they would force him into retirement. And he had to come back and do mad things like the Cultural Revolution and so on and so forth in order to imprison them, purge them, and get them clear the path for himself. And even there, remember, he didn't manage to purge everybody. Deng Xiaoping survived one of his purges. And he was protected by a lot of party people. Now, this is something that never happened in the USSR, for example, where Stalin, when he wanted to purge you, you were dead. The problem now is the power that Mao Zedong never completely controlled, unlike Stalin, that Deng Xiaoping largely watered down, even though Deng Xiaoping's control over the military was, I would say, somewhat more significant than Mao Zedong's. That had weakened, and Deng Xiaoping wanted it that way because he wanted a complete separation, in a sense, of party, state, and things like that to happen. Now, one of the things that Deng Xiaoping backtracked, and this is very important if we understand the economic consequences of Tiananmen Square, was when he started off his reforms, he made it so that it created a new middle class. And what he found with the middle class was that it really wasn't willing to support him or be thankful for him making their lives better. And you had all these students come out and start demanding political freedoms. In many ways, it's like how you see the BJP's vote bank today in India is largely, of course, now they've expanded it to the OBC community and the SC/ST community and things like that. But it used to be known as the Bania Party. And mostly it was middle-class people who had been made middle-class and emancipated by P.V. Narasimha Rao's economic reforms, who then turned against the Congress. In many ways, what happened with Deng Xiaoping's reforms was this entire kind of 30-year period compressed into the space of about 6 to 7 years. And the moment Tiananmen Square happened, he changed tack on the economy. Instead of having most of your demand being state demand, which is being private demand, which is what I'm just going to call it private and public demand, because the formal jargon we use is quite different in economics. So it was private demand, and it blossomed. It became private demand very, very quickly, albeit of a much lower level overall, because the Chinese economy wasn't terribly big at that point of time. He turned it to a system where even today, we suspect around 80 to 85% of demand, but about at least 70% of demand in China is state demand. And what that did was it created a drug dealer-like dependency, that all the new businesses and startups and what have you coming up had to, their biggest client was usually the Chinese government. And when your biggest client is the Chinese government, your children will not go around protesting against that same government. You don't have the financial independence to do what you want, kind of. And so what you find is in places abroad, like, for example, America or Australia or Britain, you find that the young Chinese coming to study out there, we confuse this with nationalism. It is not nationalism. It's actually just enlightened self-interest. These young kids, they tend to be the most pro-Chinese Communist Party people you will ever meet. It's very rare to meet any of these kids that can afford to go abroad who are against the Communist Party, because their livelihood depends on the Communist Party in many senses. And they tend to be much better off. None of them, for example, will live in a student hostel. They will all live in private accommodation, drive cars, and things like that. Now, this is really important because you need to know how it skewed the economy and the polity of that country. It created a class of people where the moneyed class, the chatterati, the influencers, they were all dependent on the government, or you wouldn't get to be chatterati or influencers at all. You were either a laborer or you were a Communist Party sympathizer slash influencer. You know, there used to be a joke in Delhi in the early days, through the 60s, 70s, 80s, when most IAS walas were from the south. You know, the joke used to be in North Block and South Block, you're either a Madrasi or you're a Chaprasi. So it was kind of like that. That was the kind of conundrum it brought about out there. And what it did, very curiously, was it made the lower classes, which is to say the laboring classes, the prime focus of any kind of political opposition to the regime. And remember, those classes are much, much easier to oppress. For example, even today in India, you'll see, you know, the left-wing press, for example, they will cherry pick certain examples of violence to portray a certain thing, and they will completely ignore violence. So, for example, the post-poll violence you saw in Bengal, for example, was completely ignored because it doesn't suit a kind of a global narrative on this. But it's very important you understand how significant the unrest amongst the laboring classes was through the 90s and the early 2000s. India would have about 5,000 recorded cases of public unrest. Public unrest is to say anything over about 50 people gathering. China at that same point of time had about 200,000 incidences of public unrest. And that was a very, very important driver. So Deng Xiaoping had removed the visibility of a high-profile protest like at Tiananmen Square, but he increased the social tensions, which led to a lot more fairly violent protests at an exponential scale at a much, much lower level down in the pecking order. Now, in all of this, suddenly comes someone like Xi Jinping. Now, Xi Jinping, I can honestly tell you, nobody thought he had the brains to achieve what he ultimately did. In fact, one of the reasons he got promoted up was that he was known as being fairly quiet, not having too many opinions, at least not having too many public opinions. And they assumed that he was somebody who could be easily manipulated. He'd be a run-of-the-mill leader, not easily manipulated, but well, I mean, not taken for a ride, but definitely somebody who would throw crumbs to everybody possible. What they never realized was that Xi Jinping was what we call a classic Chupa Rustam. All right. In a sense, they were accurate about him. I'll come to that later, that he wasn't very bright. But in certain other senses, his political acumen, because he'd been such a non-controversial guy, just, you know, sabko hanji, hanji, hanji bolte rehte the wo. They never expected him to be the ruthless politiker that he turned out to be. He managed to exterminate and crush virtually every single little faction that existed within the Communist Party, throw their leaders in jail on one pretext or the other, control the judiciary, and control the military. And he did it brilliantly. So, for example, if you look at the military, the ease with which at one point of time he was able to replace about 20, 30 generals cumulatively, he purged everybody's antlers went up. And after that, he still managed to purge almost, I wouldn't say the entire, but a very significant portion of the high command out there that was overly political within the People's Liberation Army military. He then started dealing with all it started off with the military, by the way. He then started dealing with all the regional satraps and things like that. I forget the gentleman's name, but there was this particularly Boshalai. Boshalai was this regional governor, and he was one of the prime catches because Boshalai was one of those people who, his father, he was one of the princelings. He was one of the, party royalty ke bache. What Rahul Gandhi is to Indian politics, Boshalai would have been to, kind of been to Chinese, well, more like a chief minister's son kind of thing. They all are pretty much. He was kind of like that. The way he was completely removed from the leadership was just incredible. And that sent out a sign to everybody, and he's managed to crush everything and everyone systematically. He starts off purges called anti-corruption purges. Well, everybody in China is corrupt. Xi Jinping himself would be one of the richest men on earth. His daughter goes to Harvard, and if you talk to people at Harvard who suspected that that was her, she used to drive around in a Ferrari around Boston. So, of course, you never took pictures of things because you never know what was going to happen to you, and it was never really confirmed. But if you Google it, you'll find some of these alleged pictures and things like that. Though the Chinese work overtime to hide her identity because they cite security and things like that, and Google kind of tends to comply with that. Now, the main thing that happened during the political crackdown of Xi Jinping was that it shut down all the loops. Now, if you remember the reversal of Deng Xiaoping, or rather the backtracking of Deng Xiaoping, it created this imbalance where you're a communist country, where everybody thinks you're capitalist, but still most demand is actually state demand. So it doesn't really, something doesn't add up. And in between, after that, what had happened was the elites were allowed a certain level of freedom of thought and things. You could criticize the party within party fora, but you couldn't criticize them outside in public. But still, what used to happen was when you used to go on our track twos or fact-finding missions or whatever out there, we could still have a very decent conversation where they were open to self-criticism and they tell you certain things going wrong. Once Xi Jinping came about, that enforcement of that no criticism rule became so severe that today, when the same friends that were open to criticizing policy, state policy in private 10, 12 years back, they will not open their mouths when they come back. Even if they come to India, they won't open their mouths. You go there, they absolutely will not open their mouths. You get some valuable intel from them, but that's about it. The feedback loops are completely closed. And what that means is your mistakes start accumulating because there's no, a feedback loop when you're making a mistake. In many ways, think of it like Rahul Gandhi in India, to contextualize it to an Indian situation, where you keep losing elections, but nobody within the inner coterie is willing to tell you, boss, ye kaam nahi kar raha hai, humko change chahiye. Nobody is willing to tell him that. And if you try this G23 stunt like Shashi Tharoor and Manish Tiwari tried, well, Shashi Tharoor and Manish Tiwari still have their heads. You won't have it much longer in China if you try that stunt there. So it's sort of removed all the kind of failure reinforcing redundancies that you have been removed. And it's a largely state-driven enterprise, which explains Evergreen, why it's failing and things like that, why they weren't even able to see. A lot of people outside were able to see that Evergreen was going to fail, but Evergreen itself couldn't see it. And mind you, that's just the Evergreen or Evergrande, I forget now. That's just the tip of the iceberg. You go to Beijing today, when you're going from the airport to central Beijing, almost every single time I've been there during the daytime, there's been a huge 2-hour traffic jam just to get into the city. But you look at all these high-rise buildings right outside Shanlitun. Shanlitun is like, I don't know, Upper Parel or Lower Parel in the CBD, I guess, in Beijing. You go outside Shanbitun, even there, the residential flats outside there at night, you'll see at most 2 or 3 cars parked in the stilt parking below. And out of like the 20, 30, 40 floors, you'll see lights on in maybe 1 or 2 floors. So that construction business is really screwed up. They talk about ghost cities. What they're not willing to talk about is the fact that even in Beijing, in Tianjin, in places like that, you can see this phenomenon right there within the cities. And that's even more acute in other cities. When you go out, Shanghai mein utna nahi hai. So people tend to get taken in when they go to Shanghai, because you don't see this unless you're actually out and about roaming around and looking for these things, looking for these markers very specifically out there. So this is Xi Jinping. And the debt and non-performing assets. The next thing you need to look at when you're looking at what is driving their thing is the education, the research, and the intelligence gathering, and obviously the innovation. So what happens with education is, in America, you've got this whole thing where generally the Western Europe, America, what you call the Westosphere. And now if you add up the Westosphere, which is to say North America, Europe, Israel, the UAE, Australia, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, if you add it all up, it totals a population of about 1.1 billion people with an average per capita income of $43,000. China, your per capita income is still around $10,000 and you're about 1.3 billion people. 1.3 billion people. So remember, you're looking at 4 times the market size in the West in terms, and significantly higher disposable income, because at $10,000, your disposable income is a lot less. At $43,000, your disposable income, in spite of higher living costs, tends to be much greater. And your propensity to consume tends to be much greater, and things like that. Your investment in yourself, in your education and things like that tends to be much higher. You see this thing happening out there. What also happens in this Westosphere market is that education is kind of the marketplace of ideas. Education can go wherever it wants. So for example, my phone, the touch functionality of this is based on the sort of quantum physics that Niels Bohr developed, which Albert Einstein rejected as being completely useless and unworkable. Now imagine if Albert Einstein had been the chief government scientist. He would have said, this is useless, we don't need to study it, get rid of it from university syllabuses. That's exactly what happens in China, right? The government will decide what is useful, what is not useful, and decide to get rid of something completely from the syllabus. In the West, that doesn't happen. They continued with quantum physics and things like that, which then leads to your touch screens and so on and so forth. Even your gesture control on the latest cars and things like that is basically that kind of thing. So it's a very directed kind of research. It's very narrow, and you don't get that kind of healthy all science exposure or all humanities exposure or things like that, that you fundamentally need to build up a balanced economy. It's more, we need to become a manufacturing hub. Therefore, we're going to teach you X, Y, Z. Now, this is where the spying also comes in, because, you know, China is one of the biggest spies around. They keep absorbing technology that they're told to absorb. Very frequently, they don't even know, because production has 2 parts to it, the how and the why. The how can get you about 50% of the way, but unless you know the why of why is that thing there, you're not going to get the full picture. And that is why you see that even today, something as reasonably okay as a crystal blade engine for a fighter aircraft or a commercial aircraft, the Chinese, despite all their hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars worth of investment in that, are not able to produce it. We tend to get carried away by what they're achieving with mobile phones and things. What we're not looking at is the sort of high-end technology that they do. Even today, if you look at Sweden, Volvo or Polestar, which is their EV vehicle, and what China does, you look at the critical scientific breakthroughs are not made in China. They are manufactured in China. China tends to absorb that technology very quickly. But they're still made. So I toured their R&D center in Sweden as a state guest. And the amazing thing was that 98% of the innovations that Volvo introduces in their cars are still coming out of Sweden. Tiny little Sweden with a population of what, about 8, 9, 10 million people? That's about it, rather than 1.3 billion big China. So all of this kind of adds up. See, it's a very restrictive innovation environment. It's a very restrictive education environment. And what happens is it's further skewed by the fact that every company has to show profitability very rapidly. So what happens is, in the case of construction companies like you're seeing, they tend to lie and cheat. In the case of tech companies, they compress everything, tech and defense companies especially, they compress the development schedules to have a marketable product. In that sense, it's the exact opposite of the DRDO. The DRDO doesn't work because for 40 years, they keep developing a plane which comes 40 years too late. Or for 40 years, they'll develop a tank. In China, if you don't develop a new tank within 5-6 years, you're finished. But then the amount of technology you can compress into it you're not really looking at the kind of trend-setting, norm-breaking new technologies that come in on these, right? So this is the background you need to know, the social background, the political background, and the kind of tech and this thing background. Now, understand the main points that we've looked at. A very directed espionage program, restricted, a very controlled kind of directed education, state-directed education, public state demand, a tendency to lie or to suppress or to make sort of commercially flimsy products, I guess, in a sense, and the kind of lack of self-corrective mechanisms within Beijing because of the political crackdown and things like that, and the nature of where the dissent is coming from and why it doesn't get covered the way it possibly should be covered, despite the great volume of dissent that happens in China. Now, how does this affect everything that you see happening in other countries? I've taken up way too much time because I initially wanted to make this about 7 to 10 minutes. So I'm going to compress all the other countries and just go in reasonably deep into Afghanistan, Pakistan, and I should wrap up in about 5-10 minutes max. So if you look at Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, the Chinese offered them their 5G solutions along with the Baidu satellite navigation. Now, for the least developed of these countries, Laos, this was a boon. They said yes. Thailand looked at it very, very carefully. As I recollect right now, there is still no clarity on what Thailand wants to do with it. Cambodia, again, so you look at the development, the greater the development, the fewer the alternatives. Laos is much more isolated politically than all these other countries are. The less you're willing to consider Chinese tech. And Laos is kind of now caught up in a completely symbiotic, well, it's not symbiotic, it's almost a parasitic relationship with China, where it's helping them. China is installing this technology, but it completely kind of gives China a certain level of control over that entire area. The Burmese have been much, much more smart about it because, when they want, they just kick the Chinese out completely. If China acts up, I don't think any country on earth has managed to gauge and play China the way the Burmese have. Even today, if the Chinese act up, the Burmese have absolutely no issues just kicking them all out from every single project that happens within Burma. And it helps because the ASEAN promise, the sort of legitimacy of a lot of these authoritarian governments was, we give you economic growth, you don't challenge us politically. Burma, that's never a case. They're very happy to remain politically undeveloped as long as they remain in power. In that sense, it's almost kind of like a non-nuclear North Korea in that sense. No analogy is exact, but that's kind of how it works. You look now at AFPAC. What happens is, till COVID hit, almost every session I would have with on Afghanistan in China, Chinese experts would tell me we have to focus on minerals out there and mineral extraction out there. They hadn't ever done an independent survey of what these minerals were, how deep were they, what was the sort of extractability and profitability of that extraction and things like that. And they were all referring to this 1970s report, because the Soviets actually did the only real large-scale survey of Afghanistan, which then comes up with this figure you hear of $3 trillion of new age minerals and things like that, which, as I understand it from American geologists, was completely unextractable, not just because of the security situation, but even had it been a non-security situation where they could have gone in, it wasn't worthwhile extracting. But what does it tell you when Chinese government think tanks, their foreign ministry, their defense ministry, all think based on 1970s report without having commissioned a new primary research altogether? And many people have trouble believing this, except when you actually start interacting with Chinese diplomats here in Delhi. And you realize their basic level of knowledge is so low because they develop on certain trusted interlocutors, like say reporters at the Hindu or something like that, to tell them what they want to know. So they come from a very jaundiced perspective and they confuse that with primary source research, which it is not. And they very frequently don't carry out research. You look at Chinese students, they're given enough money to travel, but they don't really come around, mingle, or do any deep social studies. I know more Indian students that go to China that do social studies, primary level research in China, get brainwashed completely. That's a different point. Than Chinese students coming here and doing the same out here. So what happens is the fundamental basis of China's interaction with Afghanistan has been driven by that, but this now runs directly contrary to Pakistan. You would have noticed how many attacks have taken place on the Chinese ports that they're building in southern Pakistan. And the China-Pakistan economic corridor still isn't completed. Because when we do our track tours with all the with the Pakistani generals and admirals and air marshals in Dubai or Istanbul or where have you, they tell you ki beta, you know, Chinese are very good, they're our friends, but we don't want them in our country. We don't want their investment in our country. When you start digging deeper and start talking to the nuclear establishment, they tell you, look, we basically the entire game is to play America off against China. America isn't biting anymore, and so we've gone too deep into the embrace of China, and we need to stop this somehow. And there are different ways of looking at this. See, because the military thinks of it as a balancing game. But you actually talk to a lot of these Pakistani business elites in Dubai and America and things like that. They're like, bhai, we have thousands of acres of land and farming. If these things come through, if the CPEC and all of that comes through and it generates employment, where are we going to get cheap labor from? What kind of social transformation is happening? Do we even want that social transformation from happening? So if you look at the triangle that controls Pakistan, industrialists, the military and the landlords, they are all equally invested in not allowing China to complete CPEC, which is why starting in about 2016, we had started seeing extremely harsh articles about the Pakistan military and the government in Chinese language journals being published in China, right? And a lot of what Pakistan did in Afghanistan in terms of, empowering the Haqqani network, because, there's the Baradar network, the Quetta Shura and the Haqqani network. The Pakistanis have invested in the Haqqani network. The Baradars had initially been invested in by China. And one of the things that Pakistan absolutely does not want, their belief is ki bhai, we put in all the blood, toil and tears into Afghanistan. We lost our friendship with America because of this irretrievably so. China is not going to go in there and walk away with all this mineral wealth. Now, notice something common. Both Chinese policy at $10,000 per capita And Pakistan, with a much lower human capital at what, about $1,500, $2,000 per capita, are still basing a lot of their policy on this 1970s report of mineral wealth, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a bit of an Aladdin's magic lamp kind of thing story. So it's their goal right now is key. Pakistan will benefit from Afghan resources. China must not. And that is adding one more source of internal tension out there, which is why I'm quite happy with the way things are proceeding between Pakistan and China, because you're actually going to start seeing more and more and more Chinese engineers getting killed in Pakistan. You're going to see less and less progressive progress in the CPEC infrastructure projects. You're going to see a lot more attacks on Gwadar and things like that. They will dress it up very conveniently. They'll dress this up as a Taliban incursion happening, the revenge of the Quetta Shura, the revenge of Mullah Baradar within Pakistan. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets labeled an international terrorist or whatever. But you're going to see a lot more instability even within Pakistan. And remember, China is not like America. Pakistan could order an attack on American troops. The Americans could even have cast iron proof. And the army chief would walk straight into Washington and lie blatantly and without consequences. I'd really urge you to read Hussein Haqqani, who used to be the Pakistani ambassador to America's a biography about this, on how Hina Rabbani Kar would just blatantly just lie. She'd be confronted with evidence and she'd just lie. ये आपने चोरी की थी, आपका ये सीसीटीवी फुटेज है, नहीं ये मैं नहीं हूं, ये कोई और है, ये कोई रास्ते में जमेदार नहीं थी, मैं तो नहीं था. That kind of lying they would do. You can't do that in Beijing. The Pakistanis don't even demand parity. When the army chief goes to Beijing, to show their displeasure, they'll only give him meetings with a lieutenant general kind of person out here, and they will the Pakistanis will suck it up. They won't insist on the same kind of equity and things like that out there. I don't know exactly the contours of how this is going to go, but if anything, don't think Afghanistan is lost or Pakistan has won. I think this is the beginning of a fantastic new Tom and Jerry cartoon. I know Tom and Jerry, when they reinvented it, they completely destroyed it, but this is the beginning of a fantastic new Tom and Jerry cartoon. Just keep looking out. There's going to be a huge big mess out there between China, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And I will end out here so we can move on.
Thank you so much, Abhijit. Really some points there which we really didn't know of, and I'm sure all those who are listening would have found them quite kind of informative. Now, a few questions I'm going to ask of you. You did mention about this 1970s report. Why do you believe, if you have done any research on that, why do you believe that Afghanistan's minerals are unextractable?
Right. So there are some minerals like copper which are extractable. One of the problems was that Pakistan wasn't allowing transit, and Iran was absolutely not going to allow transit to a port, especially to prop up an American-backed government. Right. This was number one. Number two, I've actually gone out because I spent almost a month touring around Afghanistan in early 2019, where we visited a lot of these places with American geologists, asking them, what's happening out here. And they were very, very clear. You go to any of these deposits. There are significant deposits, outside Herat, somewhere between Ghor and Ghazni, some places in Nangarhar province and things like that. Wherever we would go, they had done the prospecting and they had not found it worth. Americans had actually done prospecting. It was the first time that somebody had actually bothered prospecting out there since the Russians had done their report at that point of time. Now, remember, a Russian geologist, a Soviet geologist did not know economics. So for him, if to produce 1 gram of gold, you had to expend 1,000 grams of gold in terms of Kruger rands or gold dollars or whatever, that was perfectly fine for him because he was never taught economics in school. He did not know what a profit and loss statement was, what economic feasibility was. An American geologist who goes there, capitalism and profit and loss is almost mother's milk to him. He can't become a geologist unless he's looking at the cost benefit analysis, global prices and things like that. What surprises me is nobody ever bothered collating or talking to these people and writing about these things in public. And it shows you the difference, between primary research that you actually go and do and secondary research that you do from just reading what other people have written.
Noted. Now, the other question on China is that in which areas, and this is specific to India, in which areas does China pose a clear and present danger? And what is India doing successfully to mitigate the effects of any such thing?
So, see, the problem is, this is going to sound a bit rude, but India's great weakness is Modi's ego. But India's great asset is Xi Jinping's stupidity. There is no greater protector of India than Xi Jinping's stupidity. The problem is a stupid man can also be a very dangerous man. The problem here is you look at the way the PMO is functioning for the last 7 years, it's exacerbated a problem of micromanagement. The PM micromanages too much. So nobody in cabinet is taking a macro point of view, and the bureaucrats are all focused on micro tactical stuff, which is what they've done their entire lives. So nobody is looking at what is China going to do in 15, 20 years? What are we meant to do to counter it? And nobody's doing those backwards calculations and things like that. So it's going very ad hoc based on nobody's thinking, मैं अपने बेटे को कैसे हार्वर्ड भेजूंगा. They're all thinking, कल टिंडे की सब्जी खाएंगे या चिकन खाएंगे या परसों को मटन के लिए पैसा रहेगा या मेरे को मूली की सब्जी बनानी पड़ेगी, kind of an attitude. I mean, I'm making it sound ridiculous, but that's kind of the analogy that's happening out here. In China, it's very curious because all the young kids coming into the military right now, they're not very well trained. There's a lot of shifting happening in the military high command. One of the ways Xi Jinping controlled the military, like I spoke about right in the beginning, was he said, this is an obsolete military. We need to upgrade you. And upgrade starts with human investment. So every single battalion commander, major, whatever, they'd keep getting posted around from, say, anti-aircraft artillery to regular artillery to paratrooper to para-commander to signals intelligence and things. And signal intelligence, anti-aircraft artillery are very specialized things. You can't just, take a textile technology graduate and put him into electronic signals intercepts and things like that. We realize he did it very deliberately. He did it so that their own base with their soldiers, because they were like the Praetorian Guard, where मैं इसका मालिक हूँ और मेरे 5,000 troops are loyal to me personally. So when my general asks me to march, I will bring my 5,000 troops. He broke that loyalty equation. So no officer had that loyalty, but the problem was it was a massive loss of experience. It was a massive loss of training. I'm sorry, there's some band baja happening. If it's disturbing you, I'm really sorry about it. I never assumed that there was going to be band baja, but there is. So he completely broke the military that way at the intellectual level and at the command level. At the rank and file level, what happens is, you remember how I told you Xi Jinping's reforms concentrated all the sort of civil unrest and civic protests at the lower levels of society. Remember, it is always your blue collar workforce that provides the huge bulk of your troops, your fighting troops on the ground, everywhere, America, India, everywhere. In India, we tend to forget that because American troops speak American. That's like saying, well, Indian troops speak Hindi. How come they don't speak English? Well, they're the same kind of intake level. But what happens very complicated in this is you're seeing a whole shift in the Chinese labor force, where before it was protest, now it's passive protest. Their way of protesting is to not work at all. They find that there are more jobs than there are demand for jobs. So you can go to several places in China where it is not the laborer who is holding up a placard saying, "Main bhuka hu, mere ko koi job dila do." It is the employer, it is the factory ka malik sitting on the roadside saying, "Mera factory hai, please aake koi mere factory mein kaam karo." If you remember what happened immediately after MNREGA, when we saw the agricultural labor market collapse, that when harvest season was there, nobody was going and working in the fields. That is now a perpetual phenomenon in China. And there's something called the lie flat movement that started out there, where people have decided that they can live within like a 40, 50 square foot house room and just doing one or two odd jobs at delivery or porter or something like that. They're able to earn enough money to pay their rent, to eat their food, and they don't want to do any more. So what's happening now is there is a pushback within that level of society, even within the military. The training standards now are abysmal. There's all kinds of things happening out there. They're not getting weaker, they're getting more opposing. It's not like they've become soft like the Americans talking about, when the Taliban are firing at you, what is their immediate thing? Instead of shooting the Taliban down, it's like gender inclusivity and what is your pronouns. The Taliban will attack you, and he's more, instead of bombing the Taliban, he's more interested in not offending the Taliban commander by misgendering him, him or her or them or they or whatever pronouns you choose to use on any given day. So this is, it's the opposite happening in China out here. And that is actually having quite a bit of havoc within the military out there. So this is also something you need to keep in mind. The problem is, remember, China has such a higher level of industrialization and infrastructure that in any war, I'm quite confident the Indian military can hold its own for about 20 to 30 days. But after that point, look, industrial power just comes home to roost. This is why, Northern American states won the Civil War against the South. The South had better troops, better generals and everything, but the North ultimately won. And just an interesting side note, there is the belief that a lot of Xi Jinping's crackdowns on Jack Ma and all the service industry is because they want to throw the people out of the service industry and move them back into manufacturing. They don't want this Western style economic structure where 25% or less or 20% or less is manufacturing and services is 70%. They want to maintain manufacturing as about 60-70% of the economy, which according to me is undoable, especially given how Chinese incomes are rising and things like that. But let's see.
And while you spoke about the fact that if there is an eventuality, then someone will obviously do better. We hope it will be the Indians who prevail. But with all that you've observed so far, do you see any possibility in the near future of an actual conflict in terms of a war, or do you think these are just bullying tactics by the Chinese?
So one of the things that I've noticed about the Chinese is they're very keen on setting right historical records. And this isn't new. This has always been the case that the Chinese emperors they wanted to fix history. So, like in Egypt, there used to be a whole load of monument stealing. Like Ramesses, they say when Ramesses comes to power, a lot of his monuments were actually built by older rulers, but he'd have all their names chiseled out and he'll say, Ramesses II, king of kings, built this kind of thing, so that the gods would only bless him and wouldn't bless his ancestors before him. There was a lot of this in China where new libraries would be created to politically suit. So China's history of itself is actually very carefully curated. Most of it is archaeologically unback-upable. because the stories of all the emperors over the last 3,000 odd years is only what the last dynasty of emperors wanted you to know about them. It was so bad, in fact, that when the Ming dynasty fell and the Qing, that is to say the Manchu dynasty, was invading, the Ming emperor was still, even his capital was burning, the Manchus were coming over the walls, he was still correcting the history, the silk on which the royal histories, imperial histories were written, yellow silk. He was more interested in the grammar and the correction of that than he was in that. And then finally he took the last roll and he hanged himself from the scholar's tree rather than falling to the Manchus. But till his last few hours, he was correcting history. So this is a very common trend that they do, fixing history and things like that out there. Sorry, what was the full question again?
So the question was, do you foresee an actual conflict actually happening?
Yeah. So their big memory is Vietnam ne humko maar dala, because they lost the war with Vietnam. So they want to set that historical record right. But with India, the historical record is we thrashed the Indians. There's nothing to set right in that sense. It's more a case of a lot of peacockery, a very low intensity, high attrition game out there. But just for all your clients, if there is a war, we're doing 24/7 satellite surveillance of them. And, you know, I don't know what the Indian military is doing, but I'm doing it because I have access to commercial satellites. So I will be able to give you 48 to 72 hours notice if there's any war going to happen.
Okay. The other thing is on Afghanistan. So one part of the question is, what should be India's stance with the Taliban? How is it that you view them? Given that Pakistan, most people believe, is more like a puppet to China. So do you think China could indirectly control Afghanistan at some point of time? And would that be harmful from an Indian perspective?
Okay, so let me emphatically state this. China is never going to control Afghanistan. They don't understand the Afghans. They've never, Delhi mein hi aap dekh lo, no Chinese diplomat goes beyond the 5-star hotels. They won't even know what Delhi's food scene is. How will they know what the industrial scene in Delhi is? Right? They will only meet people like N. Ram or Sitaram Yechuri or something like that to get their knowledge of India. And honestly, would you trust someone whose paper circulation, paper sales is less than 5,000 copies, and a gentleman who can't win a single seat in parliament? Well, I mean, they've managed 5 seats or something like that. Would you trust them to know the whole of India? No. So this is one big problem that they have in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, it is a lot worse. You don't see Chinese anywhere in the countryside and things like that. So it's a very, very bad problem out there with Afghanistan. The thing is, what India's approach should have been, at least since 2018, when I actually went there, you know, there isn't a one Taliban commander I spoke to who did not hate Pakistan. And they hated the fact that, like, you know, I met the local commander in Ghor, in Ghazni, all these places, well, most places. I mean, there are a lot of places where it was too dangerous and I couldn't go, even though I had the blessings of the ISI to go there. Most of my meetings were set up by the ISI, in fact. What happened out there was they were ashamed at the fact that they had to depend on Pakistan. You know, it's like, jo mere muh pe thuk raha hai, jisne mere family ko hostage. In many cases, the families were being held hostage. Jisne mere family ko hostage rakha hai, main uske liye fight kar raha hu with weapons that he or she is giving me. Now, at that point of time, we should have been engaging with the Taliban. We shouldn't have taken a very moralistic stand. Because, you know, just like in India, cities are very progressive, liberal, or whatever you want to call them. Like, you know, in Delhi, I can say I eat beef, but you go 40 kilometers outside to say Rohtak or something like that and say I eat beef, they'll come with all their machetes and dandas and either maro you or hack you into little pieces. Afghanistan is overwhelmingly rural. So even the Uzbeks and things like that, if you go to, because 2-3 years before that, I'd been to Uzbekistan. Uzbeks, in Timur, in the this thing that Timur set up, Timur's grandson Ulugh Beg set up, the madrasa he set up. This muezzin, the prayer leader, he calls me inside because he saw me in kurta pajama and he wanted to talk to an Indian because they don't get many Indians out there. And he offered me vodka inside a madrasa. That's how westernized the Uzbeks there have become. But you go to Mazari Sharif, which is kind of a very heavy Uzbek city, almost near the Uzbek border here. The Uzbeks are like, no, you have to wear burqa. They are just as regressive as the worst kind of Taliban. So what the Soviets managed to do with Central Asia, these guys never managed to do with Afghanistan. And they think the same. Now, this is the sort of friction between the Quetta Shura and the Haqqani faction that should have been exploited. We should have started talking to them at least देर से आए पर कम से कम दुरुस्त आना चाहिए था 2-3 साल पहले, and started talking to them so that we could have supplied after. See, there should also be a redundancy plan. What happens if the government falls? We never contemplated that the government will fall. In which case, Quetta Shura was your insurance against the Haqqani faction. Now the thing is, the Quetta Shura is now demolished. What America could not do for 20 years, Pakistan has achieved with the Haqqani faction in no time at all. Now you have to give for 5 to 10 years of very, very bad years before the Haqqani faction, because remember, these are all consultative governments. Democracy isn't just voting in parliamentary elections. These are feudal consultative mechanisms, feudal pre-industrial consultative mechanisms, which work on a kind of consensual basis. To start playing politics in there and, do jugaad and play some divide and rule out there. India's security today lies in keeping Afghanistan burning. And we should have talked to them at least to keep Afghanistan burning, if nothing else. When you talk to somebody, you don't have to talk to them because you love them. If I want to kill my neighbor, for example, I'm not just going to throw a Molotov cocktail into her house. I'm going to first go and say, Auntie, aap kitni sweet hain? Aap kya khati hain? Aap mutton khati hain ya vegetarian hain? Aur fir zehar mila do na, thoda rat poison mila do, mar jayengi.
True. What is the possibility of Chinese, attacking Taiwan? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Look, just highly unpredictable. Like I said, see, the thing is, if you go by all rational indicators, and this assumption of rationality is something that bogs down the methodology of research that I do, that man is rational when we know, in fact, man is not rational. That going after Taiwan is going to bring a huge international reaction. The problem is, a lot of my own friends in Beijing, who are very, very smart people, seem to be misreading signs coming out of America saying America is not really going to stand up for Taiwan. It'll be over in about a month or so. It'll be bloody. It'll be nasty. There'll be sanctions for about 5 to 10 years. Heck, we weathered the Tiananmen Square sanctions. Why won't we weather these sanctions? So America isn't being as crystal clear as it should. If you remember the 1997 Taiwan Straits crisis, when Taiwan had its first multi-party, I think it was the first multi-party general elections, China had started threatening, saying, no, you can't have these elections because one of the opposing candidates did not want to be identified as Taiwan to be identified as a part of China. They wanted Taiwanese independence. The Americans had to put through two aircraft carriers through the Taiwan Straits to prevent any accidental Chinese, accidentally on purpose Chinese attack on Taiwan, which would then escalate. And it worked. Now, if you've seen what Biden says, yesterday on TV, he actually called a man a Negro. Either advanced dementia or advanced schizophrenia or early schizophrenia, advanced dementia, early schizophrenia, I don't know. The government itself is fighting amongst itself. There is no clear power center within the Biden administration. No direction. So we don't even know who's sending the message, and the telegraphing that they are reading in Beijing is scary. And that's what scares me. It's not the intent. It's how, you fumble into war sometimes because of constant miscommunication and misreading the signs.
Right. Coming back to China and the economy, is China's food security really fragile? Does that make them strategically weak, or is there a domestic solution that they have for the same in the long term?
So the thing about China's food security is See, they've got, they've got something called a strategic pork reserve. Like every other country has a strategic oil reserve, they've got strategic pork reserves and basic grain and things like that. Let's be clear, there is going to be no famine in China and things like that. What you can expect in China is like, the Irish potato blight that led to the Irish famine, their over-reliance on sort of industrial single varietal crops could lead to a significant wipe out of agriculture if you have a agricultural version of COVID. So what COVID did to human beings, if you have that in an agricultural pest, there is a high vulnerability out there, but there isn't a climate change vulnerability out there. There is a disease vulnerability, which in case of crops, as we know, is a very significant vulnerability. The North Korean famines were both a combination of both intended genocide as well as climate vulnerability. China, where climate vulnerability is significantly less. So their food security is not something I tend to factor in. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there who will disagree with me completely, but it's not something I tend to factor in much because I've seen how the Chinese commercial agriculture sector works. They've planned this somewhat better than most other countries have.
A quick question. Why do you think US left Afghanistan? What was the strategy behind it? Was it all scripted?
Yeah. So see, there were two failures out there. One is they assumed that their redundancy measure, which was the Quetta Shura, would work. It didn't. It collapsed completely. Why? Because they involved Pakistan in the negotiations. See, when अगर आप दो बेटे को एक के खिलाफ एक करना चाहते हो, you can't pit two brothers against each other when you know their mummy ji is the most powerful, like a typical Indian child where even when you're 80 years old, you're still a mama's boy, and jo mummy ji, jo bibi kehti hain, jo bacche kehte hain, aap nahi sunoge, jo mummy kehti hain, wahi sunoge. Even though you've got kidney stones and need to undergo dialysis and need crutches or whatever and have no hair on your head like me, you will still listen to mummy only. Pakistan is mummy out there. She knows exactly how to fix her kids. She has ways of manipulating. And this is what is particularly curious, that America didn't seem to realize that. Like, they took America for a ride for 20 years. How did you not know that Pakistan's ability to micromanage and manipulate these organizations was so finessed? So that was very, very problematic. So it wasn't, they left because they thought they had a redundancy plan. And unfortunately, the answer, the question you gave me earlier on, should we have spoken to the Taliban? It would have fallen prey to the same thing, because see, the fundamental basis of it was India never invests in primary research. JNU में, for example, आपको 80,000 मिलता है 2 weeks and 80,000 rupees to primary research. 80,000 rupees के लिए तो if you're doing a PhD in America, you won't even get a plane ticket to go to America on 80,000 rupees. What are you going to do for food, boarding, lodging, accommodation, and things like that? Nothing. So it would have still be based on the fact that this was the American redundancy plan and we should support it. We still would not have dug deep enough to realize that even that redundancy plan wasn't going to work, because they were completely exposed. They went compromised to the Pakistanis. Baradar is very, very anti-Pakistan. He spent 8 years in a Pakistani jail. And unlike Hafiz Saeed, who was getting mutton biryani and chicken biryani every day and impregnating women and making babies in jail, Mullah Baradar was not in a very nice jail. He wasn't in a nice part of the jail. He was kept in extremely harsh circumstances because he was seen as a traitor, correctly so, by the Pakistanis. But he wasn't compromised to them. He was exposed. So it would have still been flawed. So, so this is why you ask me questions helps, because I answer a question, but there's still so much more layers to it, right?
It's very interesting. I'm just going to take a few more questions because, it's such an interesting topic while we are past our stated time, but let's keep just going for a final few questions. Do you see any correlation between China's Belt and Road Initiative and the entire land grab, saber rattling that we've been witnessing on our borders? Is this a result of China's hidden agenda around financial colonization of its countries and this BRI path, and being belligerent with countries that do not buy into the strategy? Your take on this?
See, yes and no. Yes, because see, this notion that China is this 10,000-year-old civilization that has a 10,000 memory or her cheese clockwork precision की तरह coordinate हो रहा है Beijing से, it doesn't work. But it's part of a similar symptom where they want to go into Afghanistan and Pakistan without doing their homework, and they're not doing a cost benefit analysis with India. What is the point of rubbing India the wrong way? What is it that you think you're going to gain rubbing India the wrong way? They're not thinking about it. They are doing things without doing calculations, without doing analysis or anything like that. So it's part of the same symptom, but it isn't a great agenda.
Right. Again, speculation, but do you feel the Biden government has the support from Jinping and there is some under the carpet tie-up or whatever?
So I wouldn't say it has support, but there are too many people within the Biden administration whose livelihood has depended, while they were in the corporate sector, has depended on China. And invariably, when your income has depended on China, you are compromised to China. Biden is personally compromised to China through Hunter Biden. I think you've all seen all his business dealings and things like that with China. And mind you, unlike the Trumps who had very open business dealings with China, this was things we did not know about. They were in areas that no American president should children or anybody close to them should have ever had business dealings with China in those particular spheres. So no, it is, I don't think there's some cooperative hush-hush agreement between them. It's just that they're completely compromised to them, irretrievably so, in my opinion, yes.
What is the role of Wang Huning in the Chinese power structure?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. And there's a reason for it. I probably do know. It's just that I'm not able to connect that name right now. Like you saw with Boshilai, it took me a while. Right. So I will come back to that when those synaptic things in my brain click.
Sure. Okay, now coming to India, how do you rate the current defense procurement strategy with respect to modernization and at the same time keeping it make in India or made in India? Your take on the same.
So I've mentored about 7-8 defense companies in India so far. And in the last 5-6 years. And without exception, we've had to move off to America. Because when I put them into the American feeder, the technology feeder, they immediately said, this is amazing, brilliant stuff. We'll either buy the technology outright or you come and set up your factory in America because we're not going to accept this is too cutting edge. We can't fund this in India. You come there, you set it up. There was one company that came up with gigapixel cameras, satellite or drone gigapixel cameras, even before BAE Systems in America had British, but BAE Systems America, there's a very strict, we can go into detail sometime later, had come up with it before Lockheed Martin had come up with it. And they got, for 5 years, they got the great shaft from the Indian military. So they had to, I just pushed them into that technology feeder and send them off to America. Because when I mentor a company, wo mere bacche hain, I'm more interested in their interest than the national interest. And your military screwing you around anyway, you just push them out. So our military modernization, like I said, there's no backwards calculation. For me, any military modernization should be based on what are your expected growth figures? What percentage of GDP are you pegging as the defense budget? Therefore, what is the disposable cash we're going to get? How much are we going to expend on human beings, on salaries and things? What is their education level? What is their salary going to be? What is the cost of living index? Which means we have to, the inflation of soldiers' salaries. So what percentage will go off there? So what do we have for capital expenditure? What will we have left over for life cycle costs and things like that? Nothing. कुछ नहीं हो रहा है. So it's still a very, very clumsy kind of an ad hoc, na to idhar, na to udhar kind of an attitude.
Okay. So maybe let's take a final question. I'm going to club some of the questions that have come, but they all push towards the same thing. from whatever you've estimated, can India fight a war on both fronts? One is from the Chinese and from Pakistan. And do you feel Pakistan or China provoking war in India, obviously with the support of each other or together, is indirectly backed by Biden to pull down the current government in India?
No, because see, Biden, this is one thing I've noticed about the Biden administration. On one hand, they're compromised, but they realize they're compromised and, sorry to use the word, but they're shitting bricks about it. I have a friend who is compromised to China and he doesn't know what to do. He wants to take on China in a way where he doesn't get screwed over. But he definitely wants to take on China. He just doesn't know how to go about it. Right. So this becomes very, very problematic. So no, Biden isn't trying to screw us over, but the Chinese would be thrilled. I think the Chinese dream scenario is India and Pakistan have a war and they both nuke each other. No. What was the second question? Sorry, it moved away from the panel. I'm going to just check right at the end.
Yeah. So do you think India can fight a war on
two fronts? Look, the last person who thought he could do that was Adolf Hitler. Where did he end up? You really can't fight a war on two fronts. Highly unadvisable at the moment. Israel probably is the only country that's demonstrated an ability to do so. You don't want to be doing that. No.
Understood.
Even Stalin never made that mistake. He waited for Germany to get defeated before he declared war on Japan.
War on Japan. Yeah. True. Now, I must thank you a lot, Abhijit. In fact, I did get some participants' feedback that this has been a great session, a very good learning session as well, apart from the fact that it was so interesting and so away from the classical talks that we have on investment. So thank you so much, Abhijit, for your time. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And to all our participants, thank you so much for sparing time on a Friday evening to listen to all of us. Please do join us on future sessions as well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Nitin. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thank you.